Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics need counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko and joined by my co-host, the esteemed Dr. Issues.
Hello, everyone.
So this is issue number 17, our big Ant-Man and the Wasp special, where we cover the one, the only, the inimitable Dr. Henry Hank Pym. I think this is going to be a fascinating episode. Hank Pym is a longtime Marvel character and has a lot of history in the Marvel universe. So, Doc, I have definitely been looking forward to this one for the last week, and I'm sure you are as well.
The man is an absolute genius, and he has caused so many problems.
And we are definitely going to get into that. Before we do, just want to remind everybody, you can find our show on our website, capesonthecouch.live. We are available through the Libsyn network on Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, YouTube, and the iHeartRadio app. We're also looking to expand on a couple other possible apps and distribution methods, so stay tuned for that. We have a Patreon page, patreon.com/capesonthecouch. You can subscribe at the $1, $3, $5, and $10 levels. $1 gets you a shout out, $3 gets you early access and the ability to download a blooper reel. $5 gets you a longer uncensored version of the skit and a guarantee that any questions you have about some of our upcoming patients, guests will be answered. And the $10 level means that once a month you get to pick a character and we will definitely do that character and answer any questions that you have. So that's patreon.com/capesonthecouch. We've got a Facebook page, facebook.com/capesonthecouch. Our Twitter, Capes on the Couch. Doc and I also have our own individual Twitter accounts, Anthony Sitko and Doc Issues. And we have our email address, capesonthecouch@gmail.com, where we love to hear from you. We love interacting with the fans in any way, shape, or form that's possible. So please, again, continue to like, subscribe, leave a positive rating and review if you listen to us on a platform that allows reviews. Before we get into this week's episode, last week we did the Sentry, and call it a combination of amazing coincidence and total research failure. We did not realize there was a new Sentry solo series coming out last week that happened to come out the exact same day that the Sentry issue dropped. So fantastic timing. But at no point during the episode did we address the fact that the Sentry had been brought back to life several months prior, thanks to Doctor Strange. And now he has a brand new solo series written by Jeff Lemire. I picked up the first issue. It's very, very well done. I mean, Jeff Lemire is an amazing writer. He was the last good writer on Moon Knight. And yes, that's a shot at Max Bemis. But Jeff Lemire is gold on anything that he works on. He's one of a handful of writers that I will pretty much buy anything that he's working on. Him, Tom King. There's a handful of writers that I say if they're taking over a character, it's going to be good stuff. So the Jeff Lemire Sentry run, I like the way the first issue was done, and I am very excited to see where they go with the character moving forward, especially after having done him on last week's episode. My
only question is, so far, has he ripped anyone in half?
Yes. Yes, he has, actually. No, I'm not even kidding. It's in the first issue. Yes, he rips. There is at least one character that he rips in half.
To explain to the audience, I did not know that. That was not a setup question. That was meant as just this offhand joke, and it actually happened. Okay, great.
No, it definitely happened. I have it here. I'll let you borrow it. The other book I picked up, by the way, from my local comic shop was the Thanos graphic novel. And I know we did Thanos a couple of episodes ago, but Thanos' solo run, I only picked up the third book. I think it's the third book in the series. I think it just covers issues like 13 through 18 and the annual. But as soon as I got done reading it, I said I immediately need to read the first two books in this series, the first two trades, because it's phenomenal. It's Thanos, it's Cosmic Ghost Rider, it's future Thanos, it's death. It is astounding. And the annual tells some of the most ridiculously incredible, heart-wrenching stories. Thanos helps an old woman across the street is one of the most out there messed up stories I've ever read. And I know I see the look on your face, Doc, but trust me when I tell you, it's in the Thanos Annual. Thanos helps an old woman across the street, and you read, it's just like literally 3 pages. But by the end of it, you go, oh, that is horrible.
Okay. You certainly know how to sell things. So I'm going to look into it.
Yeah, definitely look into it. And if you're interested, check out the Thanos Annual. Also, by the way, check out the podcast that's co-hosted by one of the owners of that comic shop. His name is Pete. He's a great guy. I've been going there for years. Rogue Comics. The podcast is called Two Men and a Mouse, and it's about Disney World and all things Disney, basically. It's 2 guys who love Disney, who have a lifelong, not in a creepy way, but a lifelong love and appreciation, shall we say. I think that's a more polite term for it. So check that out. It's 2 Men and a Mouse. So give their episodes a listen. Moving into this week's featured guest, Hank Pym, who is in the Marvel Studios film Ant-Man and the Wasp, comes out, Friday. So I will definitely be checking that out this coming weekend. I cannot wait. I saw the first one when I was in Chicago. I happened to be there for a week for a conference, and me and a couple of the conference goers went and saw the first Ant-Man film. And I loved it. I thought it was so different from most of the other Marvel Studio stuff out there, and not in a bad way, certainly, and not slamming the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but I just thought it was visually inventive. I thought the characterization was hilarious, and anything that Luis is in, I think he's just absolutely, he stole the show in the first one. So I cannot wait to see this one, especially post Infinity War. I'm very curious to see where they go with that.
The first one definitely exceeded expectations for me. I didn't really have expectations because I didn't see how it would fit into the rest of the Marvel Universe. I just kind of had trust. But I must say, especially with the trailers that I've seen for the second one, I think this is going to fit in very nicely.
Yeah. So Hank Pym was created by Stan Lee, Larry Lieber, his brother, the King Jack Kirby, and Dick Ayers in Tales to Astonish number 27 in January of 1962. So that is now 56 years that we have had Hank Pym in the Marvel Comic Universe.
At this point, I feel like we should be able to just insert Lee and Kirby as creators, period. Like just automatically Marvel, Lee, Kirby, done.
Well, the early stuff, yeah. I mean, obviously, any character that came in later than like the 70s, but or later than the mid 60s. But even Spider-Man was Lee and Ditko. It wasn't Jack Kirby. But I digress. So originally, in the first story, he was just Hank Pym, and he discovered / created these Pym particles, which allowed someone to change their size. Go from incredibly small and then back again. That was it. So you could just shrink and then return to your normal size. So he studies ants and he creates this suit that allows him to communicate with them. And then he calls himself Ant-Man. So that's the beginning. But that wasn't until his second issue, technically. The first one was really just almost like a horror story because he shrinks down and now he has to escape all of these ants and these other things that are coming after him because he's super tiny. It's like, Honey, I Shrunk the Scientist.
Random fact. Until a few years ago, I never looked at that issue because I don't like arthropods. I don't like things with exoskeletons. So the idea of an Ant-Man was something that turned me off completely.
Yes, I remember that. And I also remember how you got over that fear of arthropods. But we're not going to get into that because this is a generally family-rated podcast. So he reveals his identity to a Janet van Dyne. She's a socialite. He was trying to get in good with her father, or her father wanted his help. I forget exactly how it went about. But so her father ends up dying and he helps her try to get revenge on I think it was an alien that killed her father, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, he gives her tiny wings with Pym particles and he calls her the Wasp. So now you've got Ant-Man and the Wasp, and they go on to establish the Avengers. They are part of the very first Avengers crew with Iron Man, Thor, and the Hulk. In fact, Janet is the one who comes up with the name the Avengers. So they are very integral to the history of the Avengers. And I remember when the first movie came out that there were a lot of people that were upset that Hank and Janet hadn't been introduced in the MCU at that point, and they said, how can you have the Avengers without Ant-Man and the Wasp? I think the movie did a fantastic job regardless, but I understand that little point.
For anyone that wants a little more background onto the origin of the Avengers, then you can listen to our episode with Loki, who was the original villain.
That's right. We discussed the starting of the Avengers then. I forget what number that was. Was that 6, 7? I don't remember. This is 17. We've lost track now. We've been doing this for over 4 months, which is crazy as it is. So in Tales to Astonish number 49, November 63, so, almost 2 years after he gets introduced, he creates the Giant Man identity. So now he can go from tiny, now he can go big. I think initially he was about 10 or 12 feet tall. That was as large as he could go. So he creates the Giant Man identity and he starts dating Janet.
I'm pretty sure that anyone that's wondering, was he compensating for something? In the comics, they indicate yes.
Absolutely. That comes out later on, that he felt, compared to Iron Man and Thor and the Hulk, that what can I do as this tiny little man? I need to be big and strong like everybody else. So that's why he creates the Giant Man identity. So then later in Avengers number 28, May 1966, he becomes Goliath. So this is now his third identity, and this is a recurring pattern we see with Hank Pym, and we're going to get into this later. But he's been a hero for about 4 years, and he's already got 3 different names, even though really all he can do is either shrink or grow. So limited skill set, not limited skill set, but it's not like he's doing all of these various things, and each identity is a different skill set. I mean, Goliath is basically the same thing as Giant Man, except he's a little bigger now.
Yep.
So he decides to come up with a brand new name.
Well, it's rebranding. I mean, Giant Man, that's not going to catch. Goliath, that's, that definitely has a ring to it.
It does. I certainly concede that. So he becomes Goliath when he returns to the Avengers, because after he started dating Janet, they kind of backed away for a little bit. So in 1968, he creates Ultron. And this becomes one of the Avengers' greatest foes, one of Marvel's comics' greatest foes, the sentient robot based on his brainwaves and the body of the Vision. So that in and of itself became a huge thing. And we'll certainly be revisiting Ultron later on, because that is definitely one of his biggest regrets and sticking points, is his creation of Ultron. So in Avengers number 59 and 60, he becomes Yellowjacket after he gets exposed to some chemicals and suffers from schizophrenia as a result.
Okay, people, I'm not going to even pretend. That just doesn't make sense.
No, I think we all can understand that in the real world, you don't get schizophrenia just from chemicals. It doesn't work like that. Science does not work that way.
Also, that's up to number 4 now.
Yes, this is the identity number 4. And here's the other thing. Here's the other thing about the Yellowjacket identity. When he comes up with it, he says, I'm Yellowjacket, I killed Hank Pym. He convinces everybody else that Yellowjacket is somebody entirely. Janet's the only one who realizes it's him. He proposes to Janet as Yellowjacket. She says yes. So when we get into some of the later stuff, just keep in mind that Janet, and I'm certainly not excusing what he did, but Janet is not blameless in this relationship. And we can do an entire other episode later on about Janet van Dyne and all of the things that she's done wrong in her history. But just saying, I'm not saying she deserved it, but she was not blameless in this, because she was like, oh, he's going through a drug-fueled mental breakdown. Let me marry this guy.
I understand what you're saying with that. But when we get to one of the major points that we're going to talk about later, be very careful about excusing things.
Again, I'm not excusing anything. And that's what I'm making perfectly clear. I'm not excusing domestic violence. All I'm saying is she was not in the right to take advantage of a man who was not in his own mind for her own marriage goals. She was like, oh, hey, he proposed to me. I know it's him, and I know he's going through a hard time and he's suffering from this drug-fueled mental breakdown, but, I kind of want to marry him anyway.
Well,
so he's offering now. I might as well take advantage of that.
That is a way to look at it. It could also be that she was trying to see if she could be a positive influence to help him in the future. I know that there's more information coming, but
yes,
just saying.
So he gets married. So he rejoins the Avengers as Yellowjacket. He temporarily gets kicked off the team by Henry Peter Gyrich, who's the Avengers government liaison. Side note, I love the character of Henry Peter Gyrich. I just think the notion of this government suit coming in and telling the Avengers how to run their team and what it is that they need to do so that they can be legal, etc., is just the ultimate thorn in their side. I just feel like he's a great heel character to use wrestling parlance. I feel like he's just a slimy, no good guy, almost like a Paulie Dangerously. And I'm going to bring it back even. Yeah, Paulie Dangerously, like early Paul Heyman. Just that slimy backstabbing, only in it for himself and just using all the loopholes. That's the feeling and the vibe that I get from Gyrich. But anyway, he rejoins the team. Then we see Scott Lang steal the Ant-Man suit to do good, but because his daughter Cassie is sick and he needs money and he needs the doctor's help to help cure Cassie, he steals the Ant-Man suit so that he can get this done. Hank Pym finds this out. Initially, he's upset, but when he discovers why Scott did this, he ultimately sanctions it as long as Scott does good with the suit. And I think that was done very well in the MCU version. Obviously, it's a much older Hank Pym, and Scott's motivations are not necessarily for Cassie's health, but it's still a situation where he's doing it for his daughter. And Hank is like, listen, as long as you do this for good, you have the capacity, I'm going to allow you to use the Ant-Man suit. So this is where now Scott Lang takes over as Ant-Man and Hank Pym is still Yellowjacket. The other thing about the Yellowjacket, and as we said, he's kind of recovered from the schizophrenia, but not entirely. And this is where he begins to demonstrate a mental breakdown. So he continues to attack villains even after they've been captured. Captain America says, listen, you're off the team. You're suspended. We're going to investigate this. Until that happens, you have to sit this one out. Hank can't deal with this. So he says, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to initiate a false flag operation with a robot. I think it was called Salvation 1.
That's right.
So he creates this robot that only he knows the weak point, and he's going to send it to attack everybody. And then he's going to come in and he's going to disable the robot and he's going to lock it down and defeat it. And then he's going to be the hero, and then he'll get reinstated to the Avengers.
And a variation of this was done in the first Incredibles movie.
Yes, it was.
So people should be very familiar with this concept.
Yes. By the way, I saw the second Incredibles recently. Almost as good as the first. I still posit that the first one is the best Fantastic Four movie ever made. I just love the whole notion of the Incredibles.
We can do an episode on the Incredibles because family dynamics and how each character is an aspect of a part of the family is done perfectly.
Oh, absolutely. Especially the second one with Violet. Did you see the second one?
No, not yet.
The second one, oh man, the things they do with Violet's character, I think, just being a former teenager myself, even though I wasn't a teenage girl, but I was still a teenager, I think they just did wonderful things with her character. Anyway, so he creates this robot. Janet discovers his plan and she goes to stop him. And then it's the slap her round the Marvel world. Now, according to the creators, how hard Hank was supposed to hit her is up for debate.
Which tells me all I need to know about really how they understood domestic violence.
Well, I'm not arguing that point, but according to Jim Shooter, who was the editor at the time, or the writer, that he was the writer at the time, he was just supposed to just do a dismissive hand wave and he was supposed to accidentally strike her. That's not what Bob Hall drew. Bob Hall drew him backhanding her and sending her flying. Now, there is a big difference. I am not condoning domestic violence at all, but there is a big difference between saying, oh, you don't know what you're, oh, I'm so sorry, and get away from me, which is how he drew it. He's like, no one will understand. This is what I need to do. And he backhands her. And this is the moment that Hank Pym, to this day in Marvel Comics, and this is 40 some odd years later, he is still remembered and vilified in Marvel Comics for that hit. And we're going to address that. But for that reason, he's kicked out of the Avengers and Janet divorces him. Now, I can't blame anybody for any of this, but my point is that this has massive repercussions and ramifications for Hank Pym moving forward. He's trying to regain some semblance of his good name because now he's penniless. He's basically homeless. So he gets arrested while stealing adamantium because Egghead is trying to influence him. And then Egghead denies everything or is out of the picture because Egghead was presumed dead at the time. That's right. Everybody thought Egghead was dead. So he goes, no, you don't understand. Egghead may be doing it. And they go, that's nice. Now you're blaming a dead criminal. That's just the kind of thing that you would do, Hank Pym. So now we definitely don't believe you. So he's later cleared once Egghead gets killed by Hawkeye, who, incidentally, Egghead killed Hawkeye's brother. So that was a nice little sweet bit of revenge for Clint there. He decides, you know what? I'm done with all the superhero identities. I'm just going to be Dr. Hank Pym, and I'm going to be an advisor. I'm going to be the scientist. And so he does some research with the West Coast Avengers, which I have read a lot of because I'm a Moon Knight guy, and Moon Knight for a long time was a member of the West Coast Avengers. So I think he dates Tiger at some point while he's out there. I don't remember all the specifics, but so he's involved with the WCA as Dr. Hank Pym. So then he returns to the East Coast Avengers as Giant Man, and then he helps the team defeat Ultron once again because Ultron is the recurring nemesis that just won't die.
What I like about Ultron is that the reason why he keeps coming back is usually because of either Pym or Vision. Just the idea that, hey, we got rid of him. By the way, I wonder how we're going to work on advancing society, and here's Ultron again. Whoops.
Yeah, he's definitely, Ultron is always going after one of his parents, so to speak. You know, either Pym or Vision. And I think that plays a lot into it. So in the Avengers Forever storyline, this is a little wonky, but follow me here. In order to fight Immortus, Rick Jones, who we could probably do another episode just on Rick Jones and all of his interactions and friendships with Captain America and the Hulk and Adam Warlock and all of, Captain Marvel and all those guys. So Rick Jones calls upon a number of heroes from different points in the timeline. So he calls upon the past Yellowjacket and the current Giant Man. So now there's two versions of Hank Pym on this team from different timelines. And the Yellowjacket betrays the team to Immortus, but then he just kind of gets overcome by guilt and he returns to side with the heroes. And it turns out later that each of the heroes was picked for a specific reason. That Yellowjacket was picked for that reason because they knew he was going to betray everybody, but he had to betray them in order to get everybody lined up so they could defeat Immortus. So it's like, curse your sudden inevitable betrayal.
We've already had that mentioned before of the frog and the scorpion in a previous episode.
Yes. Well, I was making a Firefly reference, but sure, we can also go with the frog and the scorpion.
How many people listening to this have actually seen Firefly?
I don't know, but,
I hope everyone.
I hope everyone, too. Because, God bless browncoats. Then after Avengers Forever, now he's got a split personality between Pym and Yellowjacket until they're restored by the Wasp. I'm not going to get into the specifics. It's, I don't know. I didn't really like that particular storyline. So now we're into the Civil War and Secret Invasion back to back. So during Civil War, Yellowjacket is pro-registration, but it turns out Yellowjacket all this time has been a Skrull imposter, Criti Noll. I don't know how you pronounce it.
I don't care. Skrulls as imposters sucked. I couldn't stand this arc.
Really?
I'm sorry. I know. I'm probably in the minority with this.
I wouldn't say you're in the minority, but I think it's certainly a controversial one, depending on the character. I do think if done properly, it can be done very well. And frankly, if I'm being honest, I think one of the things that the MCU should do in Phase 4 and moving forward is a Secret Invasion storyline, because I think it would be so potentially meaningful for some of the stories that you could tell moving forward, because now you go, oh, well, when were they a Skrull? When were they taken over? And I think it would just retroactively give some additional meaning to some of the decisions that were made, if it's done properly, mind you.
I don't have very good expectations for that to happen, because I think it ends up excusing if, for example, one writer thinks that the way a character was handled in the past a bit incorrectly, just this magic eraser. I don't like that concept. I think that's my problem. I'm not saying that the arc was done incorrectly. I'm saying the entire premise is off to me. So that's a personal thing. I'll admit that. But yeah, it just fell flat to me. That's
okay. All right. Well, anyway, so Janet gets killed in battle with the Skrulls. Hank decides he's going to take on the Wasp persona. So now that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. His fifth identity. Sixth if you include just Dr. Hank Pym. So he's really got an issue with picking a name and sticking with it. Then he creates the Avengers Academy because he wants to help train some young powered individuals. And I really liked this arc. I know it was just kind of I don't want to say forgotten about, but it wasn't one of the more high profile stories or high profile books at the time. It was kind of overshadowed by a number of other things that were going on, particularly AVX, etc. But I liked Avengers Academy. I thought, again, conceptually, it was very well done. I liked some of the younger characters that were introduced, Hazmat, and I forget what her name was, but she was basically like Taskmaster's daughter, or believed to be Taskmaster's daughter. I really liked, again, some of the characters that were introduced and some of their skill sets. So then he joins the Secret Avengers as Giant Man. And then we move into the Age of Ultron story. And this is not anything like the movie. They basically just took the name and the fact that Ultron was a main character and said, well, that's good enough. We've got the awareness for it. But the Age of Ultron storyline itself, I thought was okay. Wasn't my favorite storyline. Wasn't my worst, wasn't my least favorite storyline. I can't say I'm terribly fond of Hitch. Brian Hitch is an artist, and I know that's kind of controversial because he's very well liked, but there's just something about his style. It's just, But anyway, the storyline ultimately results in Wolverine and Sue Storm or Sue Richards, I'm sorry, going back in time to convince Hank Pym, when he's creating Ultron, to create this little flaw in his coding so that they go back to the present and they can introduce this virus, and it allows the present heroes to defeat Ultron.
Quite literally creating a character flaw.
Exactly. But I mean, hey, if that's what it takes to defeat Ultron, then that's what it takes to defeat Ultron.
Which always makes me wonder, Hank, you couldn't have thought of that ages ago so that you didn't have to go through all of this stuff?
Well, again, it depends on the writer. The Rage of Ultron graphic novel, which I really liked, I thought it was pretty well done. It was a self-contained graphic novel, but ultimately Hank Pym physically merges with Ultron. So now it's half Hank Pym's face and half Ultron's face, but mostly Ultron's body. An interesting ending, to be sure. Maybe not the ending I would have come up with, but that's why I'm not getting paid to write comics. I'm just here talking about them on this podcast. So I don't know who comes out the winner here.
Probably the person getting paid.
I would say yes, that's probably a good call. He rejoins the Avengers as Pymtron. I don't know how you would call this. Pym Ultron. I'm calling it Pymtron because I think it works.
I've read that, but the way you're saying it right now, all I can think of is Pimptron, which I know is just way off base, way off target.
Oh, man.
But, including...
Does he have a cane made of adamantium or vibranium?
Well, I mean, that would explain the slap, wouldn't it? Oh,
wow. Yeah, you went there. Okay. That was funny, though. That was funny. Domestic violence is not funny, but that was funny. So he rejoins the Avengers as Pymtron. Pimptron? Now every time I say that, that's all I'm going to be thinking about. I'm just envisioning this robot with a giant, wide brim hat with a feather and, this big flowing vibranium cape and...
All right.
We don't script everything, folks, I swear. So the team finds out that he's being controlled by Ultron, and they throw him into the sun.
Well, I guess that would take care of everything, except in comics, that usually just leads to things being more powered later on. Overpowered, I guess.
Yeah, generally speaking, that doesn't work. So then he encounters the team during the Secret Empire because he's not dead. And I actually like this sequence. He's wearing a chef's apron. I think it says Kiss the Overlord. And he's got a spatula and he's making burgers because he's trying to bring together Steve Rogers, who's the Hydra Steve Rogers, and Tony Stark, who's actually an AI construct within the Iron Man armor. So none of this ends up sticking because it's just the event. But he's trying to reconcile these two and basically say, hey, come on, everybody, we're a family. And Tony says, we can't work as a family because you beat Janet. And here again, this one incident gets thrown in his face. And again, I'm not condoning the domestic violence, but in the interim, he had done so much. He had reconciled with Janet. They had gotten back together. That's not really, we didn't really discuss that. But in the past, she forgave him. And it's not a situation where it was a victim of domestic violence being swayed by their abuser. They talked it out. They hashed it out. They understood that he had changed. He had grown. He had evolved. Pardon the pun. but this still gets thrown in his face. And we're going to discuss that when we get into the issues, but how much can one mistake hang over your head? And what impact does that have on a person's psyche? So that gets, again, thrown into Hank's face. And the other thing we find out is he had a daughter with his first wife. Now, we didn't mention this during the intro, but he had a wife, Maria Trovya. I think she was Russian, and she gets murdered very early on. And that's what leads to him sort of going into the research that he does. And we'll talk about that in a second when we get into his issues. But it turns out he had a daughter with his first wife, but Nadia was raised in the Red Room. So now she's got all kinds of super badass skills, because the Red Room is where they train all the Soviet Russian spies like Black Widow and Belova, Yulia Belova, Natalia, whatever her name is. Mm-hmm. So now she becomes the Wasp because Janet takes her under her wing. Womp womp, pun intended. And so now she's the new Wasp. And this is to say nothing of all of the other characters that have taken on the many, many names that Hank Pym has had over the years, because Hank Pym was the first Ant-Man, but he's not the last. You had Scott Lang, and then you had Eric O'Grady, who was the irredeemable Ant-Man, who used his shrinking powers to spy on Ms. Marvel in the shower. He was one of many giant men. He was Goliath, and at least one of the other Goliaths is Bill Foster, who was killed by the Thor clone during the Civil War event. He was, Yellowjacket, and you also had Darren Cross's Yellowjacket. You had a couple other folks as Yellowjacket. You had the Wasp. Again, Janet was the Wasp. Hank was the Wasp. Nadia is the Wasp. So every persona that Hank Pym has is taken on by at least like two or three other people. I think Hawkeye was Goliath at one point.
Yes, he was. And I was going to say, Hank Pym is the ultimate Marvel franchiser.
Yes.
You need to be a hero? Hank's got you covered.
Hank's got you covered. Do you need a name? Do you need a suit? I've already got it. It may be a little dirty. It may have some, negative vibes attached to it and some bad history. But, we'll switch it up a little bit, and then you can be the new guy, and then you can make me look good retroactively.
As long as you don't hit anyone.
Yes, as long as you don't hit women. So let's move into the issues now. I think that was a pretty solid deep dive on Hank Pym, and we could have gone probably another half hour just on his background. But let's focus now on the issues. So the first thing I want to talk about is the mental instability. I think that's something that's been exhibited throughout the character's history. The first time he suffered a breakdown was after his first wife, Maria Trovya, was murdered. And then he has repeatedly suffered numerous breakdowns, and they're usually a result of Ultron going rogue because he feels guilt and responsibility for creating Ultron. So, and then the other thing I want to talk about, and I don't know if you want to mention these together or go one then the other, is he has in canon stated that he is bipolar, but because this is the comics, he doesn't have a realistic version of bipolar disorder. He cycles between manic and depressive over the course of several days, and he uses algorithms to figure out, okay, well, what can I do when I'm manic so that I can be very effective? And then what can I do while I'm depressed so that I can get back to the manic state as quickly as possible? Because he feels empowered almost when he's in the manic state. So I don't know if you want to talk about the bipolar disorder and the mental instability, or if you want to conflict the two, or I'll let you, you're the professional, you handle it.
All right. I'm going to take both of those at the same time, because I think bipolar disorder itself can be a fantastic teaching point. Bipolar disorder, bipole. Okay, so two poles, meaning opposite ends of a spectrum. The mood spectrum that we're talking about, as Anthony has already mentioned, one side we call the manic side. The other side we call the depressed side. Most people are very familiar with the idea of depression, the idea that you're feeling sad, the idea that you don't have energy, things aren't worth doing anymore. You feel less of a person. Some people feel like life itself is not worth it. You don't eat as well, or you eat too much. You don't sleep as well, or you sleep too much. All those things are very common with depression, and most people in general, unless, the person doesn't want to talk about it or doesn't give any hints, you can kind of see it. The other side is a side that sometimes can be glorified. The manic side can be a situation where you have excessive energy. You don't need to sleep. You can go even days without sleeping. You are able to accomplish more than you regularly do. which most people would consider to be a bonus. You're able to come up with usually creative ideas, think outside the box. Those are all wonderful things. You can also think that you're better than people. Uh-oh. Well, maybe that's not good. You can also be prone to increased irritability. Okay. You can fly off the handle in terms of being very docile, but then just flying into a rage in a short period of time. Well, that's not good. You can have hypersexuality, which can be a problem because you won't know boundaries. You can lose sight of the fact that this is not a condition that should last for a long period of time because it's not truly sustainable. And you don't care because it feels great. So I'm not going to comment on whether or not Hank Pym with bipolar disorder is accurate. I'm just saying when someone is exhibiting that, it's something that everyone else around them may love the positive parts, but then when the negative side starts to hit, it creates humongous conflict because that person doesn't want that feeling to end. And the fact that Hank would want to stay in that realm of mania, that actually makes perfect sense because most people, when they have those episodes, want to keep it going. It means that they also don't want treatment. They don't want intervention. So someone like Hank Pym, who's an inventor, who loves to create things, maybe in those times, that's when he does his best. But at the same time, that also means he may not stop and think of the consequences. So I'm proposing, I'm not saying that they have to go this route, but I'm proposing that when something like Ultron comes along, something that is greater than what his creator ever anticipated, wants to do way more than any other construct had thought was possible. Is Ultron the direct physical / mechanical / technological manifestation of Hank Pym's mania?
He very well could be. And I think that was something that was addressed very well in the Age of Ultron movie, even though I know it wasn't necessarily an adaptation of the Age of Ultron storyline. But they do reference the fact that, and I know it wasn't Hank Pym, but the notion that Bruce and Tony in the movie created Ultron on very little sleep. We see them figuring everything out and they're running through all these permutations and everything. And ultimately, I think Jarvis is the one that continues to run the algorithms and unlocks it. But the fact that they were so hell bent on finding out and figuring out how they could get this done, you know, to pull in another quote from Jurassic Park, you were so obsessed with thinking out whether or not you could that you never stopped to think whether or not you should. So I think that is actually a very apt metaphor, that Ultron is the manifestation of Hank Pym's mania, that, oh, this is a great idea. What about the consequences? I don't care about the consequences. I need to get this done because this is going to be amazing.
Right. Also, to go along with this, because the mania part, that's the flashing lights and all the glory part, as opposed to the depression, which actually is the statistically much more common phase of bipolar disorder. And by the way, I don't want to make it sound like, and I realize I may have done this, I don't want to make it sound like you have to be in one phase or the other. Most people are usually somewhere in between, on the level, living their average life. Basically, the manic phases are going to be much shorter than the depressed phases. As a matter of fact, to be diagnosed with bipolar disorder, you only need one manic episode in your life. And many people exist that way, where if they have any episodes that are causing problems, majority of them are depressed. And in this case, to bring it right back to Ultron, you have a situation where your own creation has led to lots and lots of problems. It's very simple to see the idea that this one time with this massive episode, although he's had others, is leading to negative consequences, and therefore he's starting to feel bad about it. And then other people obviously are upset with how he's acted, and it can really start to weigh on a person over a long period of time. And the other part with bipolar disorder that I haven't even mentioned is that often these phases can be associated with psychosis. In other words,
the WCW wrestler?
I really hope not, because I'd like to think they have a little more skill than that. But
ooh.
No. Actually, I loved watching him wrestle. Why did they get rid of the cruiserweights? They really needed to hang their hat on that. I think they would have survived against WWE. I digress.
I was the one who started it. Blame me.
Yeah, but I didn't have to carry it. I usually don't. Oftentimes, when it comes to these different phases, you can start to have your own psyche play against you. So in other words, if a person's in a depressed phase, they can start to think, wow, I'm not worth it. You can actually hear a voice telling you that you're worthless. You can start to incorporate that and make yourself feel worse. Meanwhile, if you're on the manic side, it's not just that you think you're great. It's that you are, in the case of Hank Pym, he has a suit, so he can be Giant Man. He can be Goliath. But imagine if you don't have a suit like that, but you still think you're the most important person in the world. You start to think that you're some sort of religious entity, that you're Jesus, you're God, you're the Messiah, you're the president, you own everything. These are things I encounter every day. And so the idea that your own emotions can have this type of effect on you is something that I'm not sure we as a society have come to really appreciate until very recently. This is the type of thing that we used to be encouraged to shut out. If these were the things you were thinking, you just don't mention them. They'll run their course, and that's just the way they are. There's nothing you can do about it. An example character like Hank Pym really starts to shine a light on just how influential our emotions are, both for the positive and the negative. I don't want to paint this as a light where if someone has manic symptoms, that means you need to shut them down. I mean, so many people admittedly have these episodes and have lots of productive value in the world and create great art. So I don't want to just say, don't do it. I just want people to be aware of it. And if it goes too far, then you do something about it.
Well, it's like all things, I think, all things in moderation. So the next thing I want to talk about, and we mentioned this a little bit in the background, is the feelings of inadequacy. He literally creates the giant man persona because he felt less than compared to the strong heroes, because especially when the Avengers were created, you had Iron Man, Hulk, and Thor. Three incredibly strong individuals. I mean, Iron Man is powered because of the suit, but Hulk and Thor are amongst the strongest heroes in the Marvel universe. And then you have two people that can get really small. So Hank, it's in projection, I guess, or just general feelings of inadequacy. That's why he feels really bad. Something that I didn't mention, he was about to commit suicide when he was on the West Coast Avengers. Firebird talked him down, but he was suicidal. So he's got those feelings of inadequacy. And I think that may be one of the things that drives him as a hero, if it's sort of registered for good, if it's directed towards a positive end, that if you feel like you're not doing enough, that you can use that to a good end, but it can also turn internal and become self-destructive.
I think you have it absolutely right. He has a chip on his shoulder. And one of the most common responses when someone, and by the way, that is a historical thing. Like, I think it was from the shipyards, like someone would carry a chip if they really wanted to let off some steam. Someone would knock it off and you'd fight right then and there. That's an aside. The idea that you have to make sure everyone else outwardly knows that you can stand up to anyone that you face. That's potentially a positive thing. I can think of many environments where that's good. Obviously, athletic competitions come to mind. Many business ventures, political aspirations. You have to make sure that you can stand toe-to-toe with anyone and make it a level playing field. Great. However, when do you turn it off? If you're doing that with people where you're supposed to let your guard down, where you're supposed to be able to have vulnerabilities, and you can't, then everything becomes a fight. There's no other opportunity to recharge your batteries. You're always on the defensive. So in his case, yeah, he stepped up to the big leagues right up really early. And he did just fine. And the thing is, he did it in a way that no one else at the time was capable of. Meaning, if you can shrink down to a microscopic size, you can literally go places that no one else can go. I think that's a great idea. And it seemed
Let's go where no man has gone before. Captain's log.
Oh, maybe we should veer into Star Trek someday.
No, God, no, please. Please. I am not a Trekker.
I knew you were gonna do that. That's why I said that out loud.
Thank you for teeing the ball up.
Yeah.
But
anyway, to get back to the point, instead of seeing what he does as incredibly unique and valuable, he feels like it has to be the exact same format as everyone else. For the most part, if someone feels inadequate, it doesn't stop there. I can't be as good as you. I must be better.
Well, that's an insecurity thing.
Well,
that's just straight up insecurity, and that leads to a projection that's unsustainable.
Right. Because heaven forbid, what happens when someone, let's just say, matches you, not even defeats you. Like, let's say someone matches you. Your whole construct is wrong. And we've already gone through time and time again. What happens when a person doesn't realize that their construct is not infallible, that there are always going to be times where you're not perfect, or when someone's better, or you just weren't on your game that day.
There will always be someone stronger. There will always be someone smarter. There will always be someone faster. If they're not in front of you right now, you will encounter them at some point. And the sooner you can accept that, I think the happier we'll all be. And that's just a general life advice. That's something that took me a while to figure out as well. So let's talk about the slap, because we've mentioned it a couple of times, and really this singular moment has come to define Hank Pym over the course of his entire heroic career. And as I said, it keeps getting thrown in his face over and over again. Now, again, I'm not, and I want to stress this, I'm not condoning domestic violence. I'm not saying that he should have hit Janet. I think there's, a small modicum of controversy over just how accidental or intentional was the hit supposed to be. I think an accidental hit is much more easily forgivable than an intentional one, to be sure, but it wasn't drawn that way. So let's just operate under the assumption that he did hit her intentionally. It was in a drug-fueled mental breakdown. He was not of his right mind, and I'm not excusing this again. I'm merely providing an explanation. If you made that kind of mistake and you spent years, if not decades, making it up to the person that you hit, and they forgave you and they understood what happened because they were there, and everyone else around judges you for that one moment, that cannot be an easy thing to bear. And again, I'm not trying to defend Hank Pym. I'm merely offering an insight into his mind. And I know this is going to come back on me because I'm a man, and I know we're in the midst of the Me Too movement, and I'm not discrediting that at all. I am a big supporter of believing women. My point is simply this. Janet forgave him for that singular incident. No one else has. And I think that's one of the issues that Hank Pym faces on a regular basis. And Doc, I don't know if you can talk about what it is like to have one moment, one potentially out of character moment be thrown in your face over and over again, and what impact that has on how everyone else treats you and what that does to how you view the world accordingly.
It's literally, I think, another variation of the Scarlet Letter. There is nothing that can be said, no action that can be done after that point that will make it even. And I used the air quotes because there's no such thing. It's a false premise. That doesn't mean the person is completely unlovable, irredeemable, evil. But those are the pejoratives that are thrown onto the person, for right or wrong. I'm not trying to cast a judgment on that side. A person has a right to feel about another person however they see fit. I will say that it guarantees a narrow moat in life, meaning The second that Hank Pym sneezes wrong, it leads to people wondering, what's he going to do next? Is it going to be another slap incident? It leads to scrutiny. So not just the idea that people don't like you, but even a good action is going to be questioned in terms of its motivation. It becomes, I know we just mentioned the inadequacies and about, making sure there's a level playing field. It makes sure that the playing field is permanently skewed. So, congratulations. You now have a guaranteed uphill climb for as long as people remember who you are. And it also changes the goal, I think, because when the goal used to be, for example, we mentioned in his bipolar, to bring it back to that point, if you're in a manic phase and you want to be great and you want to be idolized and you want all of this attention, it can skew it to the point where the person wants the opposite. They want to be anonymous. They still want to do good, but they don't want people to know because it's just going to lead to people saying, yeah, but he did the slap. They want to avoid that. So it just turns the typical human motivations right on its head.
And I think we see that a lot in modern society. And again, trying to tie it into current events, I think what we see many times is now, as soon as someone makes one comment that is considered not politically correct, and I'm not defending the comments that celebrities make or that people make, but if there's one misstep, all of a sudden, boom, they are cut off. They are a social pariah, and everything they've done is now suddenly called into question. And the hashtag, all your faves are problematic. And I see that title a lot, where everybody's always done one thing that you're going to disagree with. And again, I'm not advocating at all that we should excuse sexual assault or domestic violence or horrific crimes of this nature. My point is that we are in such a race now to show how accepting and how woke everyone is and how liberal and progressive we all are. If you do one thing that steps out of line with what everyone has culturally accepted as permissible, you're going to end up further and further excluding otherwise good people who now find themselves on the outside of what is considered acceptable. And then they're going, well, then why try? Why try to be good if as soon as I do one little thing wrong, I'm just going to get excluded. And again, this is very difficult. And I know that I'm speaking from a position of privilege as a white, cisgender, heterosexual male. I am the man. I might as well have the man tattooed on my forehead. Like, I am a walking example of privilege, and I understand that. And I do my absolute level best to be mindful of that. My point is just a realistic examination of the world as a whole, and the understanding that even if everybody does 99% of things correctly, there's always going to be people that point out that 1% and say, because of this 1%, you should be shunned. And I feel like, again, Hank Pym is an extreme of that, but it's still indicative of the mindset of everybody's wonderful until you do one thing out of line and then, oh, we can't talk to you anymore. You're a social pariah. And Hank Pym is a example of that kind of taken to the extreme, and from a fictional sense, but I still think it's applicable to some of the things that are happening in society today.
And I think it behooves everyone in society to be aware of that, because when people are shunned, people become desperate. And when people become desperate, they become unpredictable. When people are unpredictable, then we have no way to plan. I am not saying in any way, shape, or form, because I don't want this to go in a certain direction. I'm not saying if you are upset about what someone did and it was negative and you point out that you're upset about it, that then you should fall over yourself to say, oh, but that's okay. That's okay. It's, you're still a good person. You don't have to automatically do that. Society is not going to be full of people that all get along at all times. That's fine. But when we go to these intense extremes on both ends, then we're doing ourselves a disservice. We end up in a situation where instead of being able to have dialogues on how to improve things, we simply end up saying, we're going to leave everything as it is because we can't even have a discussion.
Yeah, it becomes zero tolerance. And the problem with zero tolerance is there's no room for improvement. There's no potential to improve, and there's no incentive to improve. And that's the problem that I have with it. In a zero tolerance world, there's no incentive to get better because your first misstep is automatically, there's no 3 strikes and you're out. It's 1 strike and you're out. And therefore, what do you do about someone who wants to learn and grow? We all make mistakes. We're all human. We're not allowed to be human. We're not allowed to be fallible. And that's a longer societal thing, and I don't want to get into a sociological discussion. My point is just that Hank Pym, I think, is within the Marvel Universe kind of indicative of that, because this one slap has come to define him as a character that, again, Janet has forgiven him, and that's on her because she was the one that he slapped. And he ultimately made amends with her, and he has done his best, I think, to try and do good the rest of the time. But it keeps getting thrown back in his face. Now, moving into the treatment side of things, and as we always do, we start with the in-universe. How would you address some of these issues with Hank Pym? And at least from my perspective, I don't think I've ever done this before, but I'm going to make a suggestion that at least with Hank in these types of situations, it might behoove a group therapy session with other heroes to address some of these issues, because Hank has his own stuff to deal with. I don't think it should be a solely group therapy session, certainly allow for some one-on-one time. But I think a group session with some of the other Avengers and the other heroes that have this lingering hostility, and Janet, you can bring them all in and have this discussion and have Hank, whether he's, old Hank or Pymtron or whatever, have him discuss this with these heroes and hash this out so that they can all move forward from this singular incident. I think you spend the rest of the solo time with Hank talking about everything else, but when it comes to the slap, you address that in a group therapy session. And I like I said, I've never made a suggestion to you because you're the professional, I'm not. And you can tell me I'm flat wrong, but that's just an idea that I had that for this character in this particular instance might be a good idea. Am I wrong?
I think you just earned the nickname Thor because you stole my thunder.
Oh, Jesus.
Seriously, if you have a group of people that you have to deal with on a regular basis, and it's about one particular incident that everyone is aware of, but clearly there's a huge divide in terms of how people feel about it. Well, the majority feel one way and Hank feels another way. And Janet feels probably somewhere in the middle of that, conflicted, even though she's forgiven him. I mean, I can't speak to it personally, but I mean, that's the type of thing where forgive and never forget. A group session would be fine. I think it could be beneficial as long as they're willing to come to the table. What my concern is, at what point did they say they were going to come to the table? They're still at that point where they're shunning him. You'd almost have to have like a mediation ahead of time to get to that point. And Hank has to be willing, and has shown it, I know, but really be willing to play the lamb on this. Because the second that he decides he's going to battle back, it's all going to fall apart. It's going to be a situation where, once again, because he naturally has a chip on his shoulder, he's going to try and justify his previous actions. There's a difference. There's a difference between justification of a wrong and actually acknowledging you're not going to repeat the same mistake. In other words, I'm going to give a famous example from years and years ago, and I'm sorry if I'm ostracizing some of our younger millennial fans. There's a famous former basketball player by the name of Charles Barkley.
Well, he's a crazy knucklehead. That's terrible. Come on, Kenny.
And there's any number of incidents I could think of, but I'm going to think of one specifically. It was during a basketball game, and he spat into the crowd, and the spit landed on a little girl. So, Charles was being heckled. That was unfortunate. No one deserves to be ridiculed. I know we do it as sports fans, blah, blah, blah. He reacted in a way that most people would not consider the most mature. He was trying to retaliate against one person, and it ended up affecting someone else, an innocent. It was a horrible thing. the headline was Charles Barkley spits on little girl. Now, is that fair to him in that sense? No, it's not, because anybody watching could have seen, okay, he was just spitting. Like that could have landed on anybody. What he did wrong, though, in an interview later, was come up with all of these random justifications of what he did after he made an initial, like, I'm truly sorry for what I did, but then pointed out, like, well, anybody could have seen I was just spitting on the floor. Oh, and, I have to be comfortable with myself because, I know who I am and how I was raised and where I grew up. And it's like, oh, man, which is it? Are you really trying to improve, or are you just doing this for lip service? And unfortunately, with the way Hank Pym has been portrayed at certain points, I'll admit the other characters have a right to question if it's just lip service. He's definitely gone so many different directions. So yes, I'm not dismissing the group therapy. I'm just saying I'm not sure you jump in with that.
All right. Well, now out of universe, you've got a bipolar, chip on his shoulder, mentally unstable genius who has this one incident that he feels is being thrown in his face repeatedly. What do you do differently to address that in a real person?
Okay, I'm going to go by levels of severity. If I see that they're in a severely depressed or severely manic state, I'm dealing with that first. And in those instances, I do look at medication. There are medications that are listed within the psychiatric community as mood stabilizers. They're tools in the toolbox. I'm not saying that it's all medication. I'm just pointing out that in severe instances, most common ones, for example, lithium for helping with especially suicidal patients with bipolar disorder. There's also a few others. Most commonly, honestly, when it comes to the classification of mood stabilizer, many of them are also anticonvulsants, anti-seizure medications. So I would be looking at those as well. If we're not talking in those extremes and the person is much more on a base level in terms of their emotions, functioning, all of that stuff, now we get to the deep work of, okay, you mentioned the whole chip on your shoulder, inadequacy thing. Try and start a little bit from the beginning, dig a little deeper into their personality, what they grew up with, where it developed, because it didn't develop overnight. It was through years and years of interactions with other people, and what the results were. I would talk to them about, okay, what are their results of how they handled these different confrontations? Were they positive? Were they negative? I mean, honestly, if a person is going through life just fine, they don't need me. I'm not going to begrudge them that. But I have the strange feeling that they have had points where they wish they could have handled something a bit better. And so I can just kind of walk them through. There's something called interpersonal therapy where you pretty much play out situations back and forth and see if that's the result that you wanted. And just kind of critique it. Kind of like you're critiquing a script. Obviously, you can't script everything in life, but you certainly can think about how interactions are going to go ahead of time if you know that they're going to happen with a boss, with a coworker, with family, et cetera, et cetera.
I do that in my own mind all the time. If I know that I'm heading into a conversation, I will literally play out a chess match of possible alternatives. It's basically a choose your own adventure book in my own head of how a conversation, well, okay, if I say this is how it's going to go. But if I say this, then I turn to page 76. So I've been doing that pretty much my entire life. Right. I used it anytime I knew I was going to be in trouble, anytime I needed to break up with someone, anytime I knew I was going to have a confrontation at work. I would play out, okay, well, if I say this, and then try to get into the head of the other person, which has its own benefit because you get a better understanding of how other people are going to react to you, and you can tailor your speech and your words more accordingly.
The one part, though, I'll admit that would be very draining for me would be, as you mentioned, the idea that there is one thing that was so negative that everyone always brings it up, and it's weighing that person down. Because there's two factors here. The first is, how does the patient feel? That's going to be fairly obvious, and your job is to be a sounding board to, I want to say, temper some of their responses, because they could be incredibly angry, rageful about it. They could be incredibly depressed about it. Whatever the case may be, the point is, don't let it get too off kilter and give them feedback about how they're feeling, accept it, etc., etc. The part that's draining, what about your own, meaning the therapist? What about your personal opinion of what they did when they tell you? I'm not talking celebrities. I mean, it could be a complete stranger with no news clippings or headlines. But the point is, within the family, there is some horrible blemish that won't go away. And they tell you what it is, and you think to yourself, well, that's pretty messed up. It's still your responsibility to help that person. It's still your responsibility not to allow that level of judgment to cloud your ability to help them move forward. And that's the type of situation where you have to have incredibly strict boundaries, because without those, it can end up in a situation where you're starting to project not just your values, but your, depending on the circumstance, uneducated opinion. And the person could completely shut you out, and justifiably so, because you've shown your ignorance. It's an incredibly fine line to walk. So I would make sure that the person gave me as much detail as they could, not to justify the action of whatever it is that they did that was so upsetting in the first place, but to make sure that I don't get anything factually incorrect, because that's going to give them that escape hatch to just say, well, it's clear you don't understand.
And that burden, I think, tying into the conversation we had last week about depression and whether, you know, you got very emotional and you were talking about whether or not you feel like you do good sometimes. These are the things that you have to deal with on a regular basis. I, as the co-host, and our listeners don't carry that burden. They don't understand what that's like. You do. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone. So the fact that you were able to not only carry that burden, but able to function at a high level and continue to move on and have a productive life, I think is a testament to your training and your endurance and your, you know, your cognitive ability to just compartmentalize these things and to be able to say, this is just for work. And then at the end of the day, let it go or understand it and then move on. So that is a credit to you and your profession, frankly.
Thank you. I will also say that I have to be cognizant if I'm dealing with a person in that type of situation, and this is not an exaggeration, I may be the only person that they have a positive relationship with in that moment. That is not something to be taken lightly. No,
it is not. That's an incredible burden. And again, I don't begrudge you your ability to do that on a daily basis. So, well, I think we've about covered everything that we're going to cover with respect to treatment and the issues. So now we get to take all of this fantastic information. We've really gone a deep dive here. We're in an hour 15 already, and take it and apply it. So what happens when Hank Pym ends up on Dr. Issues' couch?
Hello, Dr. Pym. I'm Dr. Issues.
And how many doctorates do you have?
Well, just the one.
Well, then I don't think you're in any position to talk to me.
I'm not here to lecture you, Dr. Pym. I'm here to help you.
Like Tony tried to help me. Like Steve tried to help me. Like Jan tried to help me. Everyone who tried to help me failed and just made things worse. I could screw up plenty on my own. I don't need assistance.
Dr. Pym, you're one of the most brilliant minds in the world, a world which you've saved numerous times over. I don't think any mistakes you've made override that.
Oh, Doc, I am literally sharing a body with a sentient killer robot that I created, that I have tried and failed to destroy numerous times. That alone would be enough of a mistake to override any successes. But no, we're forgetting the time I hit my wife in the midst of a drug-fueled nervous breakdown, and now because of that one single incident, I'm labeled as an abuser. People who used to be my friends can't even look me in the eye. I'm shunned within the hero community. So please tell me again about all my successes and what they mean for me.
I understand your frustration.
Oh, I passed frustration a long time ago, Doc. I've set up shop firmly in loathing.
Loathing others or yourself?
Does it matter?
Okay. Let's change topics then. How's your relationship with Janet these days?
In spite of what I just said, I'm going to give you a break and not hurt you for saying her name. But if you don't want to be eating from a straw for the rest of your life, you will never speak her name in my presence again.
Is the hostility because you feel guilty about the end of the relationship, or because you think she'll reject you in your current state?
She rejected me a long time ago because of the slap. And I have spent all of my time since then regretting it and trying to make up for it. But depending on the day, she has or hasn't forgiven me, and nobody else has forgiven me. But, we've been over this already.
Okay, let's not be redundant then. Tell me something I don't know that hasn't worked yet, because I don't think you've mentioned any of your success. Give me one.
I mean, I'm still in control right now. I guess that counts, but I told you.
All right, Professor. You already belittled me for being smarter. So now you're falling back on the same excuses for yourself? If you want progress on your terms, then I need you to use 100% of that brain power on your own psyche. Forget about Janet, forget about Tony, forget about what the Avengers and everyone else thinks. This is all you. You say you have control of Ultron, then I say you gotta get rid of him once and for all. You do that, everything else falls into place.
You think I haven't tried? You think I haven't done everything I can to keep this monster at bay?
You keep trying to come up with these other ideas and fit in, okay? Hank Pym, every possibility at his fingertips. Throw it at your own worst enemy. Focus!
If you're right, the only way to do this is to let him back so I can take him out completely. Now, are you sure you're willing to take that risk?
What's the worst that could happen? You really have no idea, do you, about what I've gone through with alter egos?
You know how many mass extinction level events have started with the question, what's the worst that could happen? That's how Ultron came to be in the first place.
And that's how he continues to be, because you have this whole deep-seated, misconceived notion that you're, this permanent screw-up. Ooh. Look, if he was made with a pencil, you'd be the ultimate eraser.
Okay, but if this goes sideways, it's on you.
Oh, I'm sure of that.
Okay, here we go. Yes. Finally, it's good to be free again.
I think this is the first time I've ever had a patient who's not human.
Oh, I'm more than human. I am the next evolution. I'm above mankind in every way.
And yet you're stuck with a human, and you haven't seemed to figure out a way to completely escape.
You think so little of me that you assume I have no scheme? I know all about your plan to let Dad win.
Bravo. That's the easy part. Anyone that knows me realizes that I'm a pushover. So the fact that you even took the time to say anything to me instead of just breaking out and destroying the world or whatever it is that you're, supposed to be doing, you're bluffing.
The time for games is over then. If you truly seek a demonstration of my abilities, then allow me to... Wait, what is happening?
You okay there?
No, this isn't supposed to go this way. I was destined to rule over everyone. The son was supposed to usurp the father. I can't believe it ends...
I can't believe that worked.
Are you serious?
I was being sarcastic.
I don't feel him anymore. I think he's really gone.
Wow. Okay, I think I need to use you as a case study.
And I think I have to give you an Avengers ID card because you're on the team.
Does that mean I get a cybernetic helmet?
Let's start with getting you a username and password. I'll talk to Jarvis. We'll see how it goes from there. So, dude, you have to invite me to the mansion once you get access.
Hey, man, what happens in the mansion stays in the mansion.
Oh, come on, man. Don't do... You know I need to meet Cap. Come on. At least hook me up.
I'll certainly try.
Please. I need to touch the shield. I just want to shake his hand. I just need to touch the shield.
I'll tell you what. If I can arrange for you to meet Cap, well, we'll see how it goes. Okay.
I want to have him sign the shield tattoo and then have the signature turned into a tattoo.
Don't tell him that. That sounds super creepy, man.
No, but in all seriousness, I wanted to go because Chris Evans was in that play in New York, like a lobby hero.
Yeah, I know.
And I wanted to have him do that. I wanted to have Chris Evans, because I have the Captain America shield tattooed on my shoulder blade. I wanted to have Chris Evans sign the tattoo, like go to like a matinee show and then take that signature, and then go straight to a tattoo artist and say, now just literally just draw over the signature and turn that into a permanent part of the tattoo.
You are a unique individual.
I am not a unique individual because I know somebody who had that done with, I think, Kane Hodder. They have a Jason Voorhees tattoo, and they had Kane Hodder sign the tattoo, and then they had that turned into part of the tattoo. So I'm not the first person to think of it. I'm not that creative. I don't think I am anyway.
These are the people that I share this earth with. All right. Good to know.
This is the person you share the podcast with. Let's be real here.
Yeah, that's true. All right.
And you're sharing the room with, along with my cat, who's now cleaning his tail. Hi, Brucey. Hi, buddy. So that's going to about do it for this special, super long episode of Capes on the Couch. It's tying with the movie, so it's appropriate that we go a little long. Plus, again, Hank Pym being one of the founding members of the Avengers and a longtime Marvel character, we give him short shrift if we just do an hour because we'd be skipping over so much. Frankly, Cyclops could have been a lot longer, but, well,
don't
Scott's
say
a
it.
dick.
Oh, you had to say it.
Yes, I did.
Oh,
I had to. So that's going to do it. Next week, we've got Casey Jones from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So that's going to be a very interesting one because, again, as it relates to the comic books, because the Ninja Turtles have gone through so many different iterations in the comic universe, there have been numerous Casey Joneses. So this it's going to be a fun one. And then the following week, we are doing Scarecrow, the Jonathan Crane DC villain, not the Marvel Scarecrow. So that's going to about do it. Once again, reminder that we've got our website, capesonthecouch.live. We are distributed through the Libsyn Network, Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, YouTube, and iHeartRadio. You can check out our Patreon and subscribe. Want to give a shout out to our subscribers, Robbie, Brian, and Mom. So you can check us out on Facebook.com/CapesOnTheCouch, our Twitter, Capes on the Couch, and our email, capesonthecouch@gmail.com. Anything else you want to add before we leave, Doc?
Whenever you face adversity, don't shrink from the situation.
Oh, God. I hate you so much right now. So on that note, for Doc Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.